Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Nexus Youth and Family Services YouTube channel. My name is Vinny Silva. I am a marriage family therapist trainee working here at Nexus Youth and Family Services. We're a mental health nonprofit organization here in Amador County, located in the city of Jackson. And we serve Amador County. But we hope that anyone who stumbles upon us here on this channel takes away some strategies, some information, and awareness from our presentations. This month, we are focusing on post-pandemic parenting. Not only has the pandemic had an effect on the youth, an effect on families, but also an effect on the way that we parent. And there's been a frustration among parents about how can I further support my child when I'm seeing symptoms that began, we can connect it back to the pandemic. And so I find it an important conversation to have, and I've split our presentation into four major topics. One being, I want to explore the impacts of the pandemic on the youth. We'll touch a little bit on the parents, but I think in order for us to understand how to parent the youth, we need to understand what is going on with them. The world has changed completely post-pandemic, particularly around mental health. While services are increasing, awareness is increasing, the need of it has been higher than ever. Secondly, I also want to explore rebuilding family dynamics. Family structures were greatly affected by the pandemic. We were seeing roles kind of melt into one another, become little hybrids, and we saw a lot of children get parentified, and we'll get into that definition later on. I also wanted to take the time to go over three simple parenting strategies that I'm sure all parents know, but I want to allow us some time to really explore what it looks like for it to be done effectively. I think many of us would hear these strategies, maybe a lot of us even know and try to implement them, but we are failing to maintain it and keeping into consideration the population that we're parenting now, which is a post-pandemic generation. And lastly, this is a part where a lot of the families and a lot of the parents seem to neglect, which is self-care. Self-care is extremely important because in order for parents to step up for their children, they need to take the time necessary to lean on others to be poured into. If not, we are repeating the same cycles, and indirectly we're even showing our youth that it's not worthy of us taking time for ourselves to replenish our energies. With that in mind, I want to explore the impacts from the pandemic. So it is a new reality. What we're seeing out there is a significant increase in depression, anxiety, suicidal, and self-destructive behaviors amongst youth. In fact, we see that 1 in 5 youth now are being clinically diagnosed with depression. That's clinical diagnosis. That's not including youth who may be suffering from depressive symptoms. So though they may not meet all the criteria of depression, they may still feel some, or maybe one or two of the symptoms on there, and it is impairing them in some way, shape, or form. Hispanic males saw a 190% increase in rates of depression, 92% increase in Asian females, an 87% increase in African American females, and a 77% increase amongst white males. All of this is showing us a picture that the pandemic, particularly in that first year, really isolated youth to things to a degree that we have not seen before. Youth were stuck in their rooms, stuck in their homes, and although maybe some families, depending on their approach to the restrictions that were provided, maybe push the family to still do things and interact with one another outside of the house, the world in itself was restricted. Access to certain things were not the same as before. And it also affected the nonprofits and maybe the resources that exist in our local communities. So it destabilized the environment of the kid. Not only were they suffering at home, but they were suffering at school. There was a lack of proper peer socialization, a lack of extracurricular activities, and an increase of worry surrounding food insecurity and community-based challenges. One of the most important things for a child, particularly around the ages of 9 to 12, is developing their identity, and a lot of that comes from school. We're building social hierarchies, we're building social groups, we're kind of figuring out what the kids' niche is, what their interests, what their hobbies are. All of that is important, and that was taken away from the pandemic generation. So instead, we saw the youth respond and cope with the pain in various different ways. They decided to replace socialization with social media. So a lot of the youth, particularly the girls, were using TikTok as a means to communicate and connect with other youth across the country. We saw an increase in usage of online forums. And 56% of female youth, however, with their increase of usage in social media during that pandemic period, saw an increase in depressive symptoms, right? And behavior challenges. So there was an increase in aggression, both verbally and physically. And there was also an increase of emotional dysregulation that would show up in school after the restrictions were lifted. On top of that, male youth were replacing healthy extracurricular activities. We're talking mental stimulating games like maybe chess club, maybe debate club, maybe even playing sports of all kinds, basketball, football, baseball, soccer, what have you. It all got replaced with video games and online gaming. Now, those two things in itself is not necessarily bad, but parents were allowing video games to be a replacement to the structure and routine that existed for youth. And youth with having school online, for as great as the teachers were attempting to maybe limit and trying to create a healthy interactive classroom, the fact that all the youth were stuck at home inside having classes on Zoom allowed them to finesse the system a little bit. And many youth were reporting that they would leave their camera on, turn the camera off, be present in the classroom, but were video gaming during an 8-hour school day. All of that takes its toll. Imagine summer break for 12 months. That's what a lot of the youth school experience looked like. And parents, I think, were lacking in supporting it because they had to work or because they were worried and anxious. They had to lean on waiting for certain resources to help alleviate the financial strain. That consistency to check in and provide that structure for the youth was no longer there. So now youth post-pandemic, even though they're back in school, they're back in interacting, we see a lot of them lean on video games. We see a lot of them lean on social media as a way to cope. And funny enough, those environments can also add even further stress that they're seeing outside. Prime example could be the online forum that exists in video gaming. Yeah, you're relieving stress for those first 20, 30 minutes, but you'll notice an uptake in aggressive verbal aggression amongst youth males when they play video games because they're getting competitive, they're going into that online space, and now they are allowing themselves to get just as dysregulated as they would outside, but with people that are online. This has increased also their lack of ability to connect and properly communicate with other people who disagree or who are not in the same line of thinking as they are. And those behaviors, funny enough, translate outside. So the trolling, the arguments, the constant verbal miscommunication that's filled with aggression and maybe cussing each other out is being taken to school at an increased rate. Does that all come from social media? Does that all come from video gaming? No, but there is a correlation. So with that in mind, I think it's also important to kind of focus on how the pandemic affected the family dynamic within households. So what we saw with adolescents who were 13 or younger through the pandemic, there was increased negative interactions with family, especially if they were not in a two-parent household. Many single-parent families were seeing almost double the aggression, double the behavioral changes, double the anxiety and depressive symptoms, and a lot of that was coming upon them. And even in two-parent households, there was an increase in negative interaction amongst each other. Sibling conflicts were increasing. Parental and children conflicts were increasing. And the youth decreasing their interaction with friends post-pandemic as well. So this is important to consider because now socially the child is not able to really have the skills necessary to connect with those around them. And not only did it affect their friendship outside, but it's also created isolating walls within the family. And you would think, well, it's during the pandemic, everybody was together, everybody was in the same rooms, were relatively within the same distance consistently on a day-by-day basis, but interactions were actually far negative because in the background, there was just a lot of stress for everybody to deal with. So there was a relation between negative interaction with families and depressive symptoms. The more negative interaction there were, the more depressive symptoms were being found in youth. Their moms and dads are feeling so stressed out, are not taking care of themselves. And now it's kind of coming and dwindling down, having an effect on the youth and the family as a whole. We also saw an increased parentification. In other words, kids were now getting more involved in family politics, so to say. So, for example, a family who maybe is struggling with the financial restraints that's going on out there uh, with their finances. Maybe they're losing. Maybe they're not being able to pay rent. Maybe they're not able to pay groceries because everybody's stuck in the house. Kiddos who are young, 10 and younger, teenagers are hearing everything around them. So it increases. Now I'm getting more involved. And now families are relying more on their older siblings to take care of the younger siblings while they have to handle and take care and navigate what's going on inside of the house during this pandemic world. The problem is youth are not meant to step up in parental capacity. Have we seen youth step up out of necessity and been able to do it? Yes. But you notice it took a toll on their developmental stage. They were not allowed to properly enjoy themselves. They were not allowed to explore who they are in their teenage years. In fact, they were being asked to grow up way too quickly. With that, parents became more strained, having to play multiple roles. So some parents, I think, saw themselves had to play the mom and the dad role because dad had now to do double the shifts. And mom now has to try to play dad and a care and nurture motherly role. On top of that, we've seen siblings, being the older sister, having to navigate all the frustrations with their siblings and also mediate the conflict between the younger siblings and the parents. That's creating a whole lot of stress and burden for that sibling as well. Puts them in a position where, man, I'm taking on the burden of my whole family on top of figuring out how I'm going to navigate the pandemic. Also, negative family functioning became completely normalized. We got accustomed to maybe high aggressive conflict and tension amongst each other, and this was brought post-pandemic. Um, because of the high stress environment within the homes, we were feeling maybe a little bit normal about the way we interact with one another. That consisted of yelling at each other, cussing each other out, and even sometimes physical aggression. And parents overworked, worried about economic insecurity and housing and the health spheres, but they're also having to play a teacher role, a mentor role, on top of being a parent. Um, Whereas before we could rely on schools and local organizations to kind of help and contribute to us raising our children, all of that was essentially eliminated with the pandemic, and now we have to adjust to it again 1 or 2 years after all the restrictions were lifted. And we also saw an increase in marital conflict between parents, and this kind of trickled down to parent-child relations. Because I'm stressed out with my husband, because I'm stressed out with my wife, and we're yelling and we're having these interactions done in front of our family because everybody can hear us because we're stuck in the house, those conflicts and strain and anger was also brought down to our children, and now it's creating this whole structure of a family that's loose, that lacks routine, that lacks bonding, and it's centered on negative emotions, and that foundation is creating a lot of conflict and essentially destruction of a healthy family. So this kind of brings me to parenting strategies. These strategies are essentially folks intending to respond to a world post-pandemic. Now you're going to read the slides like right now and say, well, yeah, Vinny, I know how to navigate screen time. I know how to provide routine, structure, and culture. I know how to build a support team. But we have to keep in mind post-pandemic. So for example, screen time today has become the ultimate coping skill for kiddos. Now as parents, we need to have conversations about technology. Technology in and of itself is not innately bad. And we want to have that conversation with our teens and with our young ones that there's something beneficial that a lot of kiddos, particularly those who are ADHD and maybe even some kiddos who are on the spectrum, that video games help kind of regulate and actually stimulate a lot of their creative senses. And maybe it is needed. But what are conversations that we could have with youth about making technology being beneficial to them? And a lot of times I think I see parents allow the weekend become this place for kiddos to run wild with technology and binge. We're talking 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of usage throughout the day. It affects the sleeping routine. It affects the way they interact with family members, and it actually makes them even more withdrawn to socialize and go outside. And can even affect appetite, right? So screen time not only needs to have a conversation with the youth, that's the first step. The second one is, what can screen time look like during the week and what does it look like over the weekend? And there has to be a conversation about the effects and a conversation about why we are implementing these restrictions on screen time. Essentially, I would say and suggest to parents, the best window. If we're going to go during the weekday, 30 minutes to an hour. And not only is this video games, but these are iPhones as well. We see some schools already responding and asking youth to put their phones to the side in backpacks, to the side of the room. I think parents need to also take a similar approach to youth at home. What's a designated time that they can be on their phones, talk to their friends, text, call, and then it get removed and replaced. And youth are going to be fighting back and saying, well, I need to stay connected. I need to be around everybody. But it's the parent has to keep their foot strong, their foot down, and let them know why is it that we're limiting that time. Maybe over the weekend we kind of get a little bit more loose with those restrictions, but routine, structure, and culture needs to be maintained. Routine looks like some consistent time and windows being implemented within the house. Structure is how we're setting up to converse with one another. Not only are we given a routine for things for them to do, but also how do we bring up tough topics? What if their grades are low? What if they did a mistake at school? What if their friend groups and we're seeing as parents poor peer influential choices going on, and the kiddos are allowing that? We want to create a routine, we want to create a structure and a culture where we can allow youth to navigate in that space and come to us and talk to us. Youth are not going to share what's going on if they feel like we're going to judge them. And by judgment, I mean we start doing comparisons. Hey, back in my day, we fought through it. If we use always, always and never language with our youth, saying you always do this, always show this negative behavior, you're always yelling, you've never shown gratitude to me. That type of language actually, I think, creates a distance between us and our youth, and it's telling our youth that they have never met our expectations, or they're always stuck in this loop of negative behaviors. And now the youth is seeing and hearing that, and whether they register it on a conscious level or not, they're now feeling like I can't trust you and be around you. A lot of parents even share youth issues online. They'll go to Facebook, they'll go to Instagram and share about some of the most vulnerable moments that their youth is going through that the youth shared in confidence and we're putting out there to expose and sometimes maybe even indirectly embarrass our kids. That is not a culture that we're trying to build at home. So if we see that the youth is struggling, we also want to build that support team. Can we get therapeutic services? Can I get mentorship services? If my kiddo is in need of medication, do I have certain people in place that can help me get a psychiatric evaluation for my child to go see a psychiatrist and get that medication? Am I developing relationship with my teachers, principals at school? Do I have a community liaison who can help mediate that conversation between myself and the school when school is busy? Do I have neighbors and friends who can come and provide different perspectives to my youth in a positive, engaging manner? Do I have coaches looped into what's going on with my child here at home? Use that. The community in itself, community building approach is always going to be beneficial compared to always to parenting and taking it on by ourselves or just with our partner, because we get exhausted. There's going to be days that we just don't want to do it, or because we're incapable, because we feel tired and exhausted. So that brings me to parental self-care. And this is where I kind of want to wrap up, but I want to break it down. There are 3 stages of burnout. The first one is overwhelming exhaustion, and it kind of shows up to the point where we are loathing our time at home with our children. We'll get into the car, we're leaving work, and we just don't even want to be home. Second, we start putting distance from children and from our children, and I don't mean physical distance. We could show up every day, but be emotionally distant from our child. They come to us trying to talk about their problems. They come to us trying to share things, and we're giving them okay type responses. Or maybe we'll say, we'll talk about later. Dad and mom is a little bit tired right now. That's stage 2 of the burnout. We know we're reaching a point where we're going to withdraw. And when we withdraw, the child recognizes it. And when the child recognizes it, all of a sudden they're saying, my mom, my dad is not safe enough, or I don't want to burden them with my issues. I'm going to keep everything inside. And when we keep everything inside, those suppressed emotions all of a sudden get released out into the community. We start seeing behavior issues, academic issues. We see them getting stressed out and doing certain behaviors that we may have never seen our youth done before. So if we don't recognize it when we're getting exhausted, if we don't recognize when we're at the 5, from a scale of 1 through 10, we don't recognize where we're at a 5 level, and we're only taking action when we reach 10, By then, I'm not trying to say it's too late, but the impact and damage has already been done. The burnout is consuming us because we haven't built that support team, right? And we're not building a routine and structure that allows other people that we trust to help further support us and for us to share our issues and problems. So, what are some strategies? Open up about the burnout away from kids. Our children do not need to hear from our mouths that we are feeling beyond stress and that we're barely hanging on and that I'm barely being able to take care of you guys. We think it's noble when we say that because we're trying to tell them that we're sacrificing and doing everything we can. What we are doing is bringing a sense of shame and guilt to the child for existing indirectly. Or sometimes I see, particularly with single parents, we use our oldest child as our therapist when really we should be leaning on people our age and maybe even professional help to kind of vent out and let out those frustrations. But our youth cannot be hearing us kind of share all our problems and word vomit every single emotion that's kind of going on. There's a balance between it. We show them we're human. We show them that we do get frustrated and we do get tired, but we don't go to them to relieve our emotional burden. Huge difference there. We want to reframe our challenges and perspectives. How can we reframe our circumstances and the language we're using around our youth in a positive manner? So a lot of times I think I see parents kind of say, oh, this financial situation just sucks. I'm not able to really carry on. I'm beyond frustrated. I just feel like I'm a hole I'm never going to get out. Youth hear that, right? And you're allowing those negative thoughts to consume you, right? That negative self-talk. And we all know that thoughts, emotions, and action are connected to each other. It's like that triangle. And so our youth hear that and then say, well, okay, when I'm at school and things get tough and things are not going my way, I'm just going to start venting and complaining the same way my parents do, right? But we need to reframe our challenges in perspective. Instead of, man, I'm going through this financial restraint and I'm going to give up and everything sucks, we reframe it to, this is not an ideal circumstance. This is not the best situation to be in, but man, at least I have my family and we're still able to fight through it. I got food today, right? Allowing that type of language to kind of be around our family culture. Begin changing and taking micro breaks. When you're feeling a little bit exhausted, where can I get 20, 30 minutes in? Where can I get that hour of peace, silence, and solitude for me to reconnect with myself? Maybe it's when all the kids are asleep in the morning or in the evening. Maybe it's at my lunch break where I can touch base with someone else that's my age and just talk a little bit, right? Minimizing perfectionism, showing our youth that we're not always perfect, that we shouldn't always be striving for something that's unattainable like perfectionism, but in fact we give our best effort, and that some days we are at low and we're at 40 and 50%, but we're still showing up in a positive way. And finding meaning, because I think each season and each era of our lives require different meanings, different purposes. So what does that look like for each season and time? The moment we feel disconnected from that, we're going to feel disconnected from parenting and from work. So with that in mind, some resources that I have, these 4 books, Building Resilience in Children and Teens. This is a book about guiding youth with healthy strategies to use the 7 C's. And if you read that book, it'll kind of break down for you what those 7 C's are. How to Raise a Healthy Gamer. I think this book is extremely important for you to learn how to balance out you and your family's usage of technology and video gaming and how to go about that conversation. The Whole Brain Child is it provides 12 strategies on how to further assist your child's nurturing mind. This is great for kiddos who are maybe between that 6 and 10 mark. How can we set that foundation for them to already have a mindset that's built on confidence and high self-esteem? And lastly, A Parent's Guide to Self-Regulation. I think this is extremely important, learning how can parents establish regulation and self-care routines so that you can show up for your family in a positive way. So with that being said, also be mindful of some of the contacts that we have in our local Amador County area. Obviously, Nexus Youth and Family Services, but there's also Amador County Behavioral Health. And there's ACA, Amador Tulaman Community Action Agency, that can also benefit on providing parenting classes and parental resources. So with that being said, feel free to also take our survey. This would give us some feedback on how our presentation was. And it's greatly an honor to provide this information and these strategies for all of you who are listening. And I wish you guys the best and good luck in parenting our future generation. Thank you for watching.